I cannot look at myself in the mirror after the brutal revenge I suffered for being an unfaithful wife and cheating on my husband. He exposed everything publicly. My name is Roberta. I am 38 years old. I am a clinical psychologist and a university professor. My now husband, Hector, is 42 years old. He is a tax lawyer and also a teacher. We lived for years in Monterey, in a comfortable house in the Cumbers neighborhood with our 2 children, Lucas, 8 years old, and Valeria, 5. But that night, the rain seemed to mock my pain. I was driving alone on Garzasada Avenue. The car's windshield wipers tried to keep up with the rhythm of the tears that were running down my face. All I could think was, how did I get here? The entire city seemed to judge me in silence, with its headlights off and its horns muffled. The storm crackled as if it were the echo of my conscience. I drove like a ghost with a pounding heart, exiled from what had once been my life. Hector had kicked me out of the house without shouting, without making a scene, which in a way hurt more. His words were surgical, calculated, the kind you remember even in nightmares. I already called your mother. Go there. Now those words resonated with more force than a thunderclap, and, the worst part, I could not say he was wrong because he was right, and I knew exactly why. The steering wheel was wet. I do not know if it was from the rain or from the sweat of my hands. At every traffic light, my reflection in the rearview mirror looked at me like an accusation. The runny mascara, the expression of someone who had sabotaged themselves with millimeter precision. I tried to justify it to myself, to invent a type of narrative that would relieve me. I was needy, lonely, under too much pressure, whatever. But it was impossible to escape the fact that I had indeed betrayed Hector and, worse, with someone who in the long run meant absolutely nothing. An impulse, a failure, a disaster. The city moved on with indifference. The signs of the gas stations and the windows of the closed stores blurred behind the window. It was strange to realize that the world did not stop when your life was falling apart. Outside, everything seemed to continue at the same pace. Cars dodging puddles, pedestrians running with umbrellas, radios playing old cumbias. Meanwhile, inside me, an emotional war was imploding piece by piece. How could someone who always talked about emotional responsibility with patients and students have committed such a betrayal? And that was what hurt the most, the hypocrisy. I spent years helping women rescue their marriages, rebuild their self-esteem, heal from abusive relationships, and now I was the monster of the story, the villain of the story, the type of woman that I myself judged in silence, with that condescending tone of someone who believes they would never do something like that. I was not better than anyone. In the end, I was just a human being. And human at that moment seemed synonymous with miserable. I arrived in San Pedro around midnight. My mother's front door was open, the light on. She was waiting for me, but there was no comfort in that reunion. There was silence and a look that said, I knew this would happen someday. I parked slowly, turned off the car, and took a deep breath before getting out. That rainy night, I was exiled from everything that gave me identity: wife, professional, respected, current mother. Now I was just a woman with trembling hands and a broken soul, trying to survive the impact of her own decisions. And deep down, I knew that this was just the beginning. For a long time, my life seemed like the portrait of an enviable marriage. Hector and I were the kind of couple that others saw at university events and praised in a low voice. They complement each other. You can see how much he admires her. We built everything with patience and effort. We bought our house in the Cumbers neighborhood after years of saving every penny. We planned our children like someone drawing the future with colored pencils. Lucas was born when I was already teaching regular classes at the university, and Valeria arrived 2 years later, when Hector took on a prominent position in his office. At 27 years old, with a recent doctorate in psychology, I married a man who always made sure that I shone. He never tried to erase me or belittle me. On the contrary, he encouraged me in everything. It was his idea that I keep my professional name, Roberta Zamora, even after getting married. He said that my last name carried history, that my identity should not be diluted, and, perhaps for that reason, for that rare generosity, the guilt was even more paralyzing, as if I had destroyed not only a home, but also a sincere loyalty that he never hesitated to show. I remember so many Sundays when we cooked together with the children, sharing the sound of the kitchen with laughter and playlists of boleros. Little routines that today seem like relics of an emotional museum. The children's birthdays were always impeccable, planned down to the smallest detail by me, but with Hector always participating, even if it was just to inflate balloons or assemble toys late into the night. When I think about how much he gave of himself for us, it is almost impossible not to feel sick to my stomach. I hurt him in a place where he never touched me with pain. He respected me in a way that bordered on sacred. He never violated my privacy, never checked my cell phone, never asked me uncomfortable questions. Even when I told him that I needed to travel for conferences or that I would spend nights grading papers, he simply trusted. Without drama, without jealousy. Today I see this as a form of love that not everyone understands. The love that believes, even when it is not sure. And it was this love that I destroyed in 2 encounters. 2. It seems like a small number, right? 2 dates, as if the number could minimize the damage. But when you build something for 10 years and it breaks in 2 moments of weakness, what is left is only shame. The shame of having thrown away a castle for a drink of water. And it was not just the marriage that broke, it was my sense of self. I, who saw myself as someone with integrity, committed, rational, discovered that integrity is sometimes just a pretty word until it is really put to the test. Today I look back and wonder how I did not see the risk, how I let my vanity, my hunger for novelty, run over something so solid. Perhaps I was numb to a predictable routine. Perhaps it was pure self-sabotage, but the truth is that at that moment I destroyed what many people spend their lives trying to build. And although it hurts me to admit it, there is no excuse that can undo what I did. All that remains is to understand why. Or at least try, because deep down, the fall is never just because of what happens, but because of everything we thought we were and suddenly are no longer. It was a Wednesday when I decided to prepare dinner. Not just any dinner, a true gastronomic spectacle. I prepared everything with the precision of someone who wants to be forgiven without saying a word. The ribs with chipotle sauce spent hours in the oven. The baked potatoes were golden on the outside and soft on the inside, and the Spanish wine was the one he always chose on special occasions. I bought tres leches from the bakery he liked the most, even though I knew he avoided sugar. It was my desperate attempt to balance the scales with flavors. Even before he arrived, I got ready like someone in disguise. I chose navy blue lingerie that he had given me on our last wedding anniversary and, on top, a tight, discreet dress, but with a neckline that he loved. I put on light lipstick, just to look naturally attractive, and sprayed myself with the perfume he always said was my signature. Everything calculated like an ancient ritual. Only this time, instead of an innocent seduction, there was something rotten behind every gesture. It was guilt, pure and liquid, hidden under the silk. Worst of all, he was sweet. He arrived earlier than usual, brought Valeria a chocolate and sat with me at the table, asking me how my busy week at the conference had been. My stomach churned, he praised the food, thanked me for my kindness, and even joked, "With so many delicious things you want to make me fat." I smiled, but inside my throat was burning. If he had known what I had done on Monday, hours before coming home, he would have spit out every bite from his plate. But he did not know yet. During dinner, I had the audacity to pretend that everything was fine. I told jokes. I talked about a fictitious conference that never happened and even mentioned a supposed meeting with a former teacher who had not even taught in years. The cynicism of my performance made me feel sick. But I continued, because lying that night seemed easier than facing the abyss that was forming between us. I believed, or wanted to believe, that that dinner could erase what I had done, as if the wine and sweet words could bury such a dirty mistake. But I knew I could not cheat forever. My whole body gave it away. Every one of my touches was tense, every glance fleeting. While he smiled, I looked away. The food was finished. The wine diminished and the silence grew. He noticed. He asked if everything was okay. I shook my head and said I was tired. He believed. Of course he believed. He still trusted me, and that was what destroyed me the most, seeing that he believed while I was already another person, corrupt and dirty. I was there, by his side, but at the same time so far away that it seemed like I had already left. After he went to sleep, I was left alone in the kitchen, looking at the remains of the dinner as if they were the rubble of a building about to collapse. My eyes fixed on the half-full glass of wine. I took it, drank the rest in one gulp, and wanted to vomit it all up. Raphael's body was still fresh in my memory. The hotel in Guadalajara, the smell of the sheets, his whisper in my ear. I tried to erase it, but I could not. I had done what I swore I would never do, and that night I did not know how much it was going to cost me. Not yet. It landed right in my theater, or so I thought. When we went up after dinner, Hector pulled me by the waist in the hallway with an intensity that disarmed me. His eyes were different, darker, more voracious. I thought it was desire. I interpreted it as a victory for my rehearsed seduction. I thought he was delighted with my dress, with the dinner, with the navy blue lingerie he had given me. Somewhere inside me, I convinced myself that we still had salvation. That moment was the first step to starting over. How wrong I was. That night he touched me with a hunger I had not felt in a long time. It was intense, forceful, as if he wanted to mark his territory, and I loved it. I gave in, thinking I was rekindling something between us, and ironically, it was the best relationship we had had in months. He undressed me as if he knew me better than ever. His movements were precise, hungry, digging into the memories of my body that I thought were dormant. I left that room sweating, with my hair stuck to the back of my neck and a twisted smile of hope on my lips. I fooled myself into thinking that he was also reviving our love, but his look afterwards was different, distant. And now I understand. That was not reconciliation. It was a farewell. It was the first stage of his silent revenge. He used me with the same body that I had given to another person, and that was his way of marking the final time. A funeral ritual scented with passion. When I got up to go shower, he was already dressed and serious, sitting in the armchair next to the bed. When I returned, wrapped in a towel, he calmly called me to come down to the living room. "I need to show you something." My skin crawled, but I went. I am still trying to maintain the pose of a devoted wife. There was no shouting, there was no scandal. Hector simply placed his cell phone on the table with the tranquility of someone who no longer expects answers, but only confirmations. He asked me to sit down and looked me in the eyes. Then he slid his finger across the screen and opened the messages. First the traces, then the photos, a selfie of me at the NH hotel in the same blouse he had complimented me on during the previous trip. Then a video, Raphael and I getting into the elevator together. The image was grainy, but clear enough to leave no doubt. And then, everything in me froze. He explained with surgical coldness that he had noticed a small difference in the statement of our corporate card, a double charge at a restaurant he had said he did not go to. That was enough for him to hire a cybersecurity expert. 5 weeks of classified investigation. He discovered everything, detail by detail, while he continued to live with me under the same roof, kissing me in the morning, taking the children to school, having lunch with me on Sundays. He knew and, still, he waited for the right moment to destroy me with precision. While he spoke, I could only hear the buzzing of my own heartbeat. It was as if my body were shutting down vital functions so as not to faint from shame. I wanted to invent some excuse, anything, to say that it was not what it seemed. It was a moment of confusion, an existential crisis. But any attempt at justification evaporated in the heavy air of the room. He did not want my words, he wanted my reaction. And what he saw was a woman who finally realized the size of the disaster she had made. The brown envelope was the final point. Inside, an impeccable file, dates, times, screenshots, emails, receipts, even the hotel reservation, even a message where I said, "I feel alive again," sent to Raphael minutes after our second time. Hector did not say I was disgusting, he did not call me anything, he simply looked at me as if someone were watching something die. And then, with the same tranquility with which we had made love a few hours before, he said, "You are going to your mother's house." I already spoke with her. It was the end, and I realized that that last night of pleasure was actually the beginning of my punishment. After dropping the envelope on the table, He stood for a while with his arms crossed, looking at me as if he were waiting for a cry for help or a confession. The tension was so absurd that the silence seemed to have a sound. Finally, with a voice that seemed to come from an emotional tomb, he asked the questions I feared the most. Where? How many times? Do you love him? And as much as my instinct screamed at me to lie, to try to save whatever I could, I simply told the truth. Yes, it was twice at the hotel. No, I did not love him. And at that moment, even my voice sounded rotten. Hector listened to me without blinking. He simply nodded slowly, as if each answer fit into a piece of the puzzle he had already assembled on his own. There was no discussion, no emotional outbursts, just a sharp silence that hurt more than any slap. When I finished speaking, he turned around, walked towards the stairs and said, "You can leave. Your mother is already waiting for you, and do not try to come back." He did not scream. He did not insult me. And that is exactly why it hurt me so much. His contempt was absolute, glacial. A silence that screamed, "It is over," with every step he took. It took me a full minute to understand that this was really happening, that everything we had built, the Christmases, the trips, the sleepless nights with colicky children, was being erased from our history with a single sentence. I entered the room stunned. I opened the suitcase like someone packing their own body for a wake. My fingers trembled as I collected clothes, creams, Valeria's toys. Lucas was asleep. He had no idea that when he woke up, his mother would no longer be there. And I wanted to hug them, explain to them, tell them something, but it was already too late. I left like a thief stealing from her own house. Before leaving, I saw the divorce papers on the desk. Yes, he had already started. And not only that, Hector also took care of another detail. My name was being removed from the co-authorship of a joint project that we had been developing for 2 years at the university. A project that I loved, that involved the mental health of children in public schools. It was my pride. Now I would no longer have my name in the credits. I was not going to miss my wedding, I was simply also going to lose my place in the world I built with him. A calculated punishment, without a trace of impulse, all planned to the millimeter. When I closed the front door, I heard the click of the lock with a metaphorical weight that hit me in the chest. It was the sound of the end, an end without tears, without drama, without scandal, just the surgical end that a deeply wounded man is capable of carrying out. And the truth is that at that moment I could not hate him. A part of me even admired him because he had the elegance of someone who does not stoop to the role of a noisy victim. He simply took me out of the equation with the coldness of a surgeon who cuts to save what was left. Himself. And there, alone on the sidewalk, I was no longer a wife or a partner. I was just the woman who had been exiled. I got into the car with trembling hands and started the engine without really knowing where to go. Despite his clear order, my mother's house, of course, she was always like going back to the place where everything started or maybe where everything was wrong from the beginning. The city seemed to have a new weight. Every building reminded me of something I no longer had: stability, routine, family. And even with all that, there was still a part of me that did not know what to do with the hole in my chest, because it was not just the marriage I had lost, it was the version of myself that I liked the most, and that was now dead. When I arrived in San Pedro, my mother was already waiting for me at the door, with her arms crossed, wrapped in a silence that spoke more than any sermon. Teresa Zamora, 64 years old, is a literature professor, divorced 3 times and owner of a presence as imposing as it is bitter. Her look was not one of surprise, it was one of confirmation. As if to say, of course this would happen to you too. She did not ask questions, she simply pointed to the old room, the one that always smelled of old books and floral lotion. And there, as I dropped my suitcases like someone surrendering their weapons, she left and came back with an object that would turn my shame into a curse. It was a blue silk dress, almost identical to the one I wore that night at dinner with Hector. She held it with both hands, as if it were a trophy in shadows. "I wore this the night I destroyed my marriage to your father," she said without blinking. I froze, not because of the revelation, but because deep down I already knew. The way she talked about men, the way she always blamed others. Whenever she talked about my father, there was a hint of contempt. Now I understood why. She also cheated with this singer from Monterey. During a carnival, the dress was the mirror and I was the reflection. I sat on the bed with the dress on my lap, as if I were holding a family curse. It was impossible not to think of the irony. The same piece, the same shade of blue, the same glow of poison seduction. That dress seemed to carry within it the weight of all the wrong decisions of the Zamora women. My mother never cried for any of the 3 weddings she ruined, but that night her eyes trembled. We always think we deserve more, that we are trapped in a life that is too small for us. Until we make a mistake and discover that we were simply numb from our own ego, she whispered. Hearing that from her was like hearing myself from the outside, as if for the first time I understood that what I did was not just an individual failure, it was part of a pattern, a cycle, a heritage. My mother, my grandmother, before her, all carried the same poison disguised as emotional freedom. We always confuse self-esteem with impulsiveness, deserved need. And now I was the newest link in this rotten chain. But unlike my mother, that did not provide me with any relief. I was disgusted by my part, her of everything. She left the dress hanging on the doorknob, as if she wanted it to look at me every time I entered or left the room. And he looked. He looked at her and said, "You are more like her than you want to admit." And that was my sentence. For days I kept looking at that blue fabric like someone trying to make peace with a mirror that shows the worst version of themselves. I began to understand that perhaps the betrayal did not begin in Guadalajara, but much earlier, in the barely told stories of my family, in the silences of childhood, in the absence of my father, in the emotional absence of my mother. But unlike her, I felt it. I felt everything, the weight, the mud, the shame, the anger. And it killed me inside. Because the worst thing about being a reflection of someone you despise is knowing that maybe you were always destined for this. And in that room, with the blue dress swinging slightly in the wind from the fan, I began to wonder, is it possible to break a cycle like that? Or are some stories doomed to repeat themselves generation after generation like a silent family plague? The irony crushed me. I, Roberta Zamora, a doctor of psychology, author of articles on marital behavior and affective dysfunctions, deceived by my own mind. Accustomed to analyzing other people's emotions with almost surgical precision, I now found myself completely incapable of understanding my own. My own decisions seemed like a labyrinth, and I was lost in the center with no way out. I spent years warning patients about destructive impulses, unresolved needs, and transgenerational traumas, but in the end, I was not immune and maybe I never have been. My mother, sitting on the porch with chamomile tea, would drop loose phrases as if they were not bombs. Did you know that my second husband, Ricardo, forgave me for an affair, but then cheated on me with his secretary? It was a cycle. And then, Jamie, the third one, well, I never loved him. I only got married because I was tired of being alone. Each revelation was a splinter that she pulled from her own soul and, without realizing it, she also pulled it from mine. It was like watching the manual of my perdition being read aloud. I was following the playbook. Point by point, she said that betrayal was just the tip of the iceberg, that the cruel truth is that women like us always think we deserve something more, something too big for what we have. That we confuse restlessness with dissatisfaction, that we believe we are too complex for an ordinary life, and, when we find someone who offers us peace, we confuse it with boredom. Those words pierced me because they were mine. I have thought this so many times in silence, that hearing someone else say it was like hearing a recording of my own mind. And there, on that balcony in San Pedro, with the sun hidden among the dry branches of the garden, my mask of a professional, a wife, a mother, of everything, began to dissolve. I was not superior to my patients, not even more evolved. I was just another woman, trying to understand why, despite everything, I still felt like something was missing. And in the process of filling that void, I caused an even bigger hole. My ego betrayed me, my vanity blinded me, and my profession that I loved so much now seemed like a theater where I played out a wisdom that was not my own. It was at this point that I realized what know yourself really means. It is not to understand yourself in theory, it is to face yourself at your worst. It is to accept that, Even with all the books read, with all the theses defended, you can still be pathetic, impulsive, fragile. You can still make a huge mistake and, worst of all, you can make a mistake knowing that you are making a mistake, but thinking that you are smart enough to deal with the consequences later. But life does not work like that, and when it collects dearly. Little by little, I began to understand that my biggest mistake was not the betrayal itself. It was the arrogance of thinking I was above it, that because I was a psychologist, I would be immune to the mud of human emotions. But the truth is that at the end of the day, we all have our breaking point, and mine was exactly where I thought I was strongest. It was a family wound, ancestral, emotional, and now it was open, completely open. Bleeding, and for the first time, without any theory that could stop it. Hector has never been a man of scandals. He was the kind of person who killed you with silence, not with shouts. And that is exactly what he did. While I was crying in the corners of my mother's house, trying to pick up the pieces of who I was, he acted cold, necessary, implacable. He did not post anything on personal social media. He did not expose me directly on any channel. But a few days after I left, a text appeared on his LinkedIn profile, a report in the tone of a professional reflection, anonymous, but with enough details for everyone who knew us to understand. He was her trophy, and I was the stuffed animal in the corner of the room. The text spoke of ethics, of trust, of the devastating impact of partnerships broken by ego and betrayal. But it was the subtext that screamed. He mentioned an academic colleague, a university project with social impact. An event that occurred during a conference in Guadalajara, enough for anyone in Monterrey to know exactly who the colleague in question was. And worst of all, the text went viral. It was shared by professional colleagues, debated in forums, praised for its sobriety and respect for personal pain. While I was swallowing my shame, he became an elegant martyr in a story that I myself wrote. The practical effects were not long in coming. My invitation to 2 academic conferences where I was supposed to speak was withdrawn. One of them already had posters ready with my name. I received courteous, but cold emails. In view of the recent events that have reached our coordination, we believe it is best to postpone your participation. No one said what they knew. They just made it clear that they knew. My phone stopped ringing. The research groups silenced me, and my students who were previously engaged began to avoid me in the hallways. Soon, my prestige collapsed like a building with hidden cracks. I was officially a walking embarrassment, and, in the meantime, Raphael, for whom I had risked everything, was removed from the consulting firm where he worked. They said it was due to an internal restructuring, but everyone knew the truth. The scandal reached him, even without his name being mentioned. And guess what? He disappeared without messages. No, let us solve this together. Nothing. As if I had been a delirium for 3 nights in a hotel. A disposable mistake, and that made me realize that on top of everything I was a fool. I thought I was living a forbidden romance, when in reality I was just a quick entertainment for a mediocre man. The final blow came with an article published in a widely circulated legal blog. The author, also anonymous, dissected the emotional and professional impact of infidelity in academic settings. It was practically an ethical file full of technical terms, bibliographic references, and a subtle, devastating emotional charge, the kind of text that wins awards. And I read every line knowing that it was about me. It was like watching your own death in slow motion. He did not need to call me anything. He did not need to raise his voice. He just had to let the world conclude on its own. And then something inside me broke once and for all, because it was not just the end of my marriage, it was the end of the respect of others, the end of the professional that I worked so hard to build. Hector destroyed me with the same elegance with which he loved me for years. And, honestly, maybe I would have preferred him to scream, to break everything, but no, he hurt me where it hurt the most, in my ego, in my prestige, in my reputation. And there, while the world applauded his sobriety and I was forgotten between the lines, I understood that he had won, and with class, the worst kind of class in history. Deep down, I still tried to dig. It was after the blog article, after the cancellation messages disguised as professional procedure, after losing invitations, colleagues, and any crumb of credibility. I was sleeping in a borrowed room at my mother's house, with the lamp failing, surrounded by psychology books that no longer told me anything. On a morning of insomnia and desperation, I wrote the message to Raphael. Cancel the hotel. Cancel the ticket. Delete my number. It was brief, direct, cold. The last thing I could control, cutting that rotten bond. He saw it, and he never replied. Afterwards, I started writing to Hector. I deleted and rewrote it dozens of times. In the end, I sent a long message. I told him I loved him. I apologized for everything. I begged him for a chance. I humbled myself with sincerity. I promised that I would rebuild myself, that I would seek help, that I would heal from that emotional hunger that destroyed our lives. I confessed that my mistake was guided by vanity, by lack, by the shadow of a family history that I did not even fully understand, that now I finally saw it all. That it hurt me like I never imagined it could hurt. And I asked him, as if it were a prayer, to let me talk to him just one more time. But he saw it and did not reply. There was no block, there was no return, just emptiness, the kind of silence that destroys. Because the lack of response is not just absence, it is a message, it is a sentence, it is the final point that no one writes, but everyone reads. And that sank me once and for all. It was as if my body could no longer support my soul. I started to lose weight, to have anxiety attacks, to cry everywhere. I cried in the bathroom, in the supermarket line, in the car, in the pharmacy parking lot. My mother said it was an exaggeration. I knew it was a collapse and no one could get me out of there. That was when I did the unthinkable. I took an absurd amount of medication, without planning properly, without thinking about the consequences. I just wanted to sleep or disappear or be forgotten once and for all. Hours later, Tommy, my brother, found me with purple lips and an incomplete note by my side. He took me to the hospital where I was intubated, monitored, admitted. I survived, but I paid the price. The cerebral ischemia left me with the right side of my face paralyzed. My smile, the one that was once a source of praise in the classrooms, was now crooked. I could no longer look at myself in the mirror. I was literally transferred to a psychiatric clinic where I spent almost a year in treatment. Medications, therapies, silence, more silence. It was like living inside a chamber where time did not pass. The days dragged on between bland meals and mandatory conversations with strangers who were also trying to survive their own ruins. Sometimes I dreamed of my last night with Hector, but in my dreams he answered. In dreams he cried with me, but when I woke up there was only the white wall of the clinic room and a mirror covered with a cloth that the nurses put there because I asked them to. It was there, in this limbo, where I began to understand what true regret is, not the kind you feel when you are caught, but the kind that consumes you when no one else is judging you, only yourself. Regret that becomes a prayer, even without faith. I did not want to go back to being who I was. I just wanted to stop feeling that I was worthless. And at some point, between one group session and another, a therapist told me, maybe forgiveness does not come from the other person, maybe it has to come from you. But I still did not know how. I only knew that my ruin was not a punishment, it was a transition. I just had no idea what was to come. Almost a year after the hospitalization, I returned to my mother's house. It was not a glorious return, it was a crawling return, full of silences. It was different, less vain, slower. The right side of my face still did not respond well to commands. My smile was a crooked outline, my eyes were sunken, and I avoided mirrors like someone avoiding judgment. But that gray morning, something woke me up early. A light rain was falling outside, and its noise was identical to that of the night when everything began. I got up as if I knew that the time had come to do what I had been avoiding for too long. I went down to the backyard and looked at the clothesline, where the blue dress was still hanging. The same one, the one my mother had shown me as if it were an inheritance. The piece that became a symbol of the repetition that haunted me. I took it with firm hands for the first time, without fear. It was damp, old, and smelled of mothballs and regret. With it in my hands, I went to the back of the yard where my father used to burn leaves. It was a small space, made of dirt, surrounded by bricks. I brought alcohol, matches, and a plastic chair. I knew what I had to do. My brother Tommy appeared shortly after. He is 3 years younger. He has always been more emotional, more connected to invisible things. When he saw the dress, he did not ask anything. He simply nodded, as if he knew that that moment was not just mine. It belonged to all the women in our family. We were silent for a few minutes. The sound of the rain mixed with the smell of wet earth. I left the dress on the ground, poured alcohol on it, and lit the match. When the fire took hold of the fabric, I felt my chest open up. It was as if every flame were cleaning something inside me. The flames danced, devouring the blue as if they were feeding on my guilt. Tommy put his hand on my shoulder and said, "Maybe this will save your soul." And for the first time I believed it. Not as someone who expects miracles, but as someone who finally accepts that there is no turning back. The fire was irreversible. The dress no longer existed. The past, although still present inside me, had lost its sacred object. It was a ritual, perhaps primitive, but deeply necessary. It was my offering to the gods of repentance, or perhaps to my own spirit. I stood there until the last piece turned to ashes. The rain increased, but it did not put out the fire. And in the end, when everything vanished, I did not cry. I just took a deep breath. For the first time I thought about being alone, not as a punishment, but as an option. A choice that did not arise from pain, but from the need to purify myself, because the cycle needed to stop for me. I did not want to repeat it again, or be a reflection, or seek redemption in the arms of others. I wanted to look at myself, even with my crooked face, even with shame, and say, "It is over." A few weeks later, in a burst of courage, I posted a photo of myself, natural, without a filter, with my face visibly crooked, smiling slightly like someone trying to live. I received messages of support, yes, but also others, some strangely objective, men who said that my new face seemed sexy to them. One even wrote that he had a fetish for women with facial disabilities and wanted to get to know me better. Some even offered to help me financially with the treatment in exchange for having sex with me. And there, reading those grotesque messages, I thought, Karma has a sadistic sense of humor. After using her body as currency to cheat, now it was he who was cheating on me, becoming a fetish object. It was the universe spitting back with sarcasm, what I once gave for free thinking I had control.